Oh, you should mute.
Yeah.
Hey, you here for the Ruby class? Cool. Just wait another few minutes, give folks a chance to show up.
I'm Anthony, by the way. We had that call a while back.
Oh, yeah.
We kind of slowed down a little bit, but I was super busy during this last time, but the next like month and a half are going to be a little more open for me. So.
Did you say you're moving to Oakland or something?
No, I'm going to be house sitting in Perth for
okay.
a month and a half.
Okay. Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Right around the time we've been talking. I don't know, but we'll talk after class maybe.
Yeah, let's catch up a little bit. I'm just waiting. I'd start maybe in a minute, but yeah, cool. Are you gonna be able to answer questions that folks have? Like,
I've never worked with Milko Gary before, but here to watch.
Okay, sure.
That's whatever I can.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Quite a lot of people. Cool. I'll get started. So I haven't taught this class before. Rails School. There's a bunch of us that teach classes every week. In case you haven't been before to Rails School, has everyone here been, or is this the first time at like a Rails School Ruby class here at Noisebridge for anyone? So you all, is it yours the first time? Yeah, but you guys have all been before to like a Rails School class. Okay. Cool. So you know the drill. You know, we each pick a topic 1 week and then sort of do hands-on exercises or whatever. So I haven't taught this before. I propose to basically do like the basics of SQL, create our own SQL database, and then understand how like HTML parsing works, what the DOM is, and where I have sort of planned it, it's pretty basic, but we can like run through it and get, try and do more stuff depending on what folks are up for. I got a chance to say hi to most of you. Um, I'm Samir. Could you maybe tell me your name and what your background is in like in coding or with Ruby or whatever?
It's Andrew. I'm Rails dev.
Oh. Oh, you are? Okay.
10 months.
Oh, okay. This might be kind of basic stuff for you then, but feel free to jump in with suggestions or questions or whatever. And at the back there?
Me?
Yeah.
Matt, longtime geek, getting into Ruby, Rails, full stack.
Okay. Okay. Well, I know we have like quite a few Ruby folks with some background in Ruby, so maybe we'll try to do something more interesting or play around with the Ruby pieces a little bit more, because I think, frankly, I'm prepared for like a much more beginner level of students, so we might have to make this up a little bit as we go along. Well, I'll get started. So the basic idea that I thought we'll use as an example, as an exercise for the class is, and I proposed this I think on the main Rails school, on the web posting, is let's figure out how to scrape a page, right? So let's figure out how to scrape this page, and there's a lot of information on this page that we might want to store in a local database. So there's a lot of structured information for every post. There's like a post ID. There's a title. There is like someone's name. It says who posted the post, what subreddit it has been posted to, and so on. So I picked this example because the HTML on a Reddit page is pretty simple, but also it has a lot of structured information that we can sort of go through the process of figuring out how we want to model that in our database. So one thing I do is I use Firefox, and Firefox, there's a plugin called SQLite Manager that lets you manipulate SQLite databases through Firefox. So it's a GUI, it's a pretty simple GUI, and it lets you open a database, add tables, add rows, and so on. So I'm going to write the code in Ruby to do the work of populating the database, but I'm going to use Firefox to look at the changes that we're making and to actually see that they're in the database. Okay. So there are really two pieces to scraping any website and scraping and storing information on a website. There's the scraping part and the storing part, right? So we'll start with the scraping part and understand how, how do people typically scrape web pages, and specifically in Ruby, how do you do it? Okay. So basic thing to know about a web page is that it consists of HTML code, right? And there are two ways that you can look at HTML code. You can either open a source window. In the case of Firefox, it is Command U on a Mac. Opens up the window with all the source in it, and you can see it's all sort of HTML tags. And the other way of doing it is to use a Firefox built-in option called Inspect Element. So if you right-click on the browser window and you say Inspect Element, then you get a much more visually easy-to-read structure, which is the HTML that's on that page. Okay. One critical difference between seeing it in the Inspector tab and seeing it on the source code is that the Inspector tab contains all the HTML after it has been dynamically processed. So if there's any JavaScript that is modifying the HTML after the page loads, you'll see the final HTML created in the Inspector tab. Whereas if you only look at it in the source file, you'll see the HTML that loaded to start with. You won't see any changes made to the HTML by JavaScript. So usually, apart from the fact that Inspector makes it easy to read, it also means that you're actually seeing the final HTML being rendered. So the other thing that inspector does is that it visually shows you that different tags are descendants of other tags. And that's the basic idea behind parsing an HTML page. The fact that all of the tags inside the page exist in a tree structure. Okay, so a tree structure means you start at a root, and at every point it branches into kids, into children. Okay, so the root of any HTML page is this tag called HTML. Is that visible? Or is that too small? I don't know if it's possible to make it. Oh, it is possible to make it bigger. Ah, there we go. So the root of any HTML document is a tag called HTML. And you can see this HTML tag has 3 children. Most documents will have at least a head child and a body child. And then you can see that body has many children and head has some more children. So you can navigate this as if it's like a folder structure on your computer, right? So when you're parsing an HTML page, what you're really doing is you're trying to figure out the child-parent tree structure. And you're looking for these individual tags within that structure. So you can say, so one way of describing that is like you're going to walk the HTML tree. So you're going to start from one point and then walk down the tree and its children looking for the specific tag that you want. Okay. So the way you walk the tree is that you convert the HTML into something called a DOM. DOM is DOM, Document Object Model. And the Document Object Model is basically a representation of the HTML showing which nodes have which children. So it's a way of representing the HTML. The HTML is just a text file, but when you convert it to a DOM, you get a sense of, you basically represent the root node, the children of the root node, the children of the children of the root node, and so on. So the first step in parsing any tree is to convert it to a DOM. And there are lots of libraries for DOM conversion of HTML. The one that is most popular, I think, in Ruby is called Nokogiri, N-O-K-O-G-I-R-I. So let's actually start playing around with Ruby at this point. So I'm going to start IRB. Is everyone familiar with that, using IRB, accessing Ruby? Okay. I'm going to require a couple of libraries or gems. One is OpenURI, which will let me fetch URIs pretty easily. It's probably the simplest and also easiest Ruby gem to use when downloading HTTP content. And then the other thing I'm going to require is Nokogiri. So those are 2 gems or libraries that I'm going to need to do my basic parsing. Then I am going to use, so once you've required OpenURI, you can open any URL just by saying open and then put the URL. So when you do that, it will actually fetch that URL, and it will put the content of that URL into, it will return the content of that URL. And then you can do things like, you can basically manipulate the return value of open the same way that you would manipulate a file. So it's basically letting you treat a web page like a file. Okay. So just as I can do read lines on a file, I can do read lines on the return value of the open command. So if I say how many lines were there were 10 lines. And then if I read each line, you can see that each line has a bunch of HTML in it. Okay. Well, so I need to convert these lines into a DOM, right? So for that, I need to use the Nokogiri library. And the way you do that is you still do the same open, but now you pass the return value of the open into the Nokogiri HTML parser. So when you do this, basically you're telling Nokogiri that I have a file. The file contains HTML. Open that file, read all the lines, parse the HTML, and turn that into a DOM. So basically now you have the same HTML structure has now been converted into a DOM, and you can see there's a bunch of stuff, but basically if you look at like a piece of it, what you'll see is that there are a bunch of what are called XML elements, where each element basically corresponds to a tag somewhere in the HTML. Okay, and so if you start from the root of the DOM, so I should actually say something like, so what you get is the variable, I'm going to turn off echoing for right now. Basically what you get when you parse the HTML is you get a variable that points to the root of your DOM. And then you can start from there and access all of the nodes by accessing the children. So for example, if I started the DOM, I can say, what are all the children of the DOM? And that gives me all of the children starting from the top of the DOM. And you can see that the children of the root is basically the entire HTML file, right? If I say, how many children does that have? It says there are 2 children. If I say, what is the first child? Is that not how it works? That lets me do. Let me see that. Not quite sure how children works, I guess. This is the document, and then okay. 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 Sorry about that. I forgot. So the way the DOM gets parsed, the root actually points to, I guess I could call it a dummy root. It's basically the root is saying, here's the HTML document, and it is accompanied by what's called a DTD. And a DTD is sort of a companion document that says something about the structure of the HTML document. So when you actually parse any document, Nokogiri, the root that it creates is sort of like a dummy root. So instead, I'm just going to say the actual root is the second of the two children when you actually parse Nokogiri. Okay, so yeah, it's a little confusing, but if you want to figure that out, it's read up on what's a DTD, and I'll try and explain kind of what that's set up as. So if I look at the actual root, then one thing I can ask is what is the name of that root? And so here we can see this is the actual root, and its name is HTML, right? So that HTML corresponds to this root over here. And then if I say, how many children does this have, we expect to see 2 children, because the HTML here has 2 children, the head and the body. Okay, so that information, so that tells you that there are 2 children, and in fact, if I say, what is the name of the first child, it confirms that it says head. And if I say, what is the name of the second child, it confirms that it's body, and so on, right? So if I want to find a specific child inside this HTML document, I could basically do this. I could say, you know, find the child of body. I say something like body node equal to this, and then I say, well, body node, how many children does that have? Oops, sorry, that's not what I meant. Body node is the second child, and then I say, how many children does that have? That has 9 children. So that means you open this up. Oh, okay, there's 9 children, and then you can go into the next level and start looking. And ultimately, we want to find the node in the HTML, the element in the HTML that corresponds to the specific things that we want to extract, right? So obviously, one way of doing this is to write code that will walk through the tree, look at each child, find out what the name is, and then locate the one you're interested in. That would be possible. It's a very interesting programming exercise, but HTML makes it very easy to access lists of children based on certain properties. Okay. And the way you do that is you use something called, well, there are 2 ways of doing that. One is to use something called XPath, XPath, and the other is to use CSS selectors. In general, if you've coded in HTML front-end coding, you're probably much more familiar with CSS selectors than with XPath. XPath, I think, is a slightly older technology, but they're basically both ways of expressing which node in an HTML tree you're interested in, based on the name of the node or the attributes and so on. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but XPath might be slightly more powerful. You might be able to like construct more search queries using XPath language than CSS selectors. But for the purpose of what we're doing, CSS is just fine. Okay. Is everyone with me so far? Any questions? Ruby or CSS selectors. So to understand how CSS selectors work, a CSS selector is basically a string of words, and it is the, if you've done any CSS coding, the CSS selector is what you put before the curly braces. And a CSS selector says, find me all nodes or all elements that match the selector. The simplest CSS selector is simply the name of the element. Okay, so the CSS selector, which is simply the string body, will return the node which represents the body tag. Okay, it will also return the body tag and all of its children tag. So you get all of them in one go, right? So if I say DOM-root.css, that's the way I say it, and here's my selector. Then if I say body 2 equal to that, you can see that both this, so what it returns is actually an array. So if I say put as body2.count, And then so the CSS selector, because the selector returns all of the nodes that match. And there could be more than one node that match a selector. So it'll return an array containing all those nodes. If there's only one node, the array will contain only one element, but it'll still return an array. You had a question on what?
Where you have body, and
Yeah.
what's what? Is it like an argument you're passing in?
Yes, yes. So if you're not familiar with Ruby, that is a syntax that is peculiar to Ruby. Passing arguments to methods. Ruby doesn't require you to have the parentheses. You can leave it out. So you're actually passing the body argument to the CSS method. So it's the same thing. So obviously, if I look for the head, and then I ask, let me do this. So if I say, where's the head? How many elements are there that match the head? There's only one. If I look for an element of which I know there's more than one, I'm going to get a much bigger number, right? So if I say match div, it returns all of the elements which are div inside my HTML, and you can see there's a lot of them. Which, if I go back to my HTML, I can confirm that, yeah, there's a lot of divs. I can't confirm there's 376 of them, but I can confirm there's a lot. So it seems about right, I would say. So that's basically letting you get a whole lot of the nodes. Once you actually have a node, so let's look at this body2 node. I said body2, 0. This is, sorry, I changed that. Let me, okay, so body2 is this node. Its name is body. Nodes have essentially 3 properties, every node. It has a name, it has children, and it has a set of attributes, right? So if you look at the body tag here, it has a name, it's body. It has a bunch of children, which we know there's about 9 of them. And then it has attributes. In this case, it has only one attribute, and each attribute is a pair, a key value pair. So the one attribute for the body node is its key is class, and the value of that key is this whole thing between the quotes. Okay? How you get that same information in Nokogiri is by using the ATTR method, attr, for attribute. And it basically says, for the body node, give me the value of the attribute whose key is class. And it basically gives us the same value here that we see in the HTML over here. Right? Okay, so we've gotten as far as being able to access nodes fairly easily. If you know the name of the node, you can at least get a list of all of the nodes that match that name. You don't have to recursively go through the children yourself. But we're still a bit far away from identifying much more specific nodes, right? So first let's figure out how you actually identify the properties of a node that you're interested in, right? And you do that, you can do it in many ways, but the easiest way is probably to use the inspector element. So I want to know what is the div and its corresponding attributes that correspond to this title. So how I do that is I right-click on the piece of the HTML page that I'm interested in, and I say inspect element. And what the inspector tab will do is that it'll show me the div, the HTML div, that corresponds to that piece of real estate on the screen. Okay, and in Firefox, I think Chrome behaves similarly too. If you hover over the div down here, the corresponding area, graphically speaking, is highlighted in blue. Right, so you can see that when I hover over div, all of the piece in the browser that was rendered inside that div is highlighted with the background, blue background. Right? So now I know that this div, if I was to extract that div, I will get all of the content which is being shown there, which includes the title, the submission information, the subreddit, and those 2 words comment and share. Okay, so that div corresponds to all of that content. If I move my mouse down, I can see that this P element corresponds to just the title. Most websites will have attribute names and values that make it very obvious what it stands for, right? So here it says I have an element P, it has a class whose value is title, and that is the title of the post. Most well-designed websites will have class attributes, attribute values that are fairly intuitive. If I move down to the anchor tag, you can see that that also corresponds to the title of the post, and that's because it's a hyperlink, right? So hyperlink in HTML has to be represented by an anchor tag, and here's the link to the actual post on Reddit for that article. Okay, so I know that if I got all the divs, well, I don't know this, so I'll make a guess that all the divs which contain the post title information have a class value of entry. Okay, that's just my guess, because entry seems to indicate that each of these articles, and there are 25 of them, is an entry on this page, right? So it would assume that every div whose class value is entry is in fact one of these lines that I'm trying to scrape. So first, let's see, how do I do that? I know how to get all the divs. How do I say give me all the divs which has a class value of something? Okay, and the way you do that in HTML is that you say you give the name of the element, and then you put a dot, and then the name of the class that you're trying to search for. So this is the CSS search query equivalent, or the CSS selector equivalent of saying, give me all the div elements whose class is entry. At least one of whose class values is entry, right? So you can see here that the various class names can be separated by a space. And if I enter it like this, then as long as at least one of these is entry, my CSS selector will return that node. So if I made this guess that all divs which have a class value of entry will be all of the entries on this page, how would I confirm that my hypothesis is correct? How would I confirm my conjecture? Yeah, did I hear count? So if my conjecture is true, then the number of entries I got back should be equal to the number of entries on this page. And Reddit makes it easy for me to see how many entries there are because it puts a number there, right? So I should get 25 entries when I do this. And that's what I get. So this way I can confirm that my guess that Reddit, the Reddit website, has given the name entry to all the entries on the page and only to the entries on the page. I can validate that by doing a count. So this is my way of checking. It's still not mathematically true. Like, there could be 25 other divs that happen to be coincidentally 25, and they all have the value entry. So when you're making web scraping guesses like this, you have to sort of go with your best guess. But you have to be aware that sometimes your best guess might be wrong. You also have to be aware that if the website changes, if they stop calling the class name entry and they call it post for some reason, your scraping will stop working because what you're searching for is not what's on the page. Okay, so now I have all of the entries. If I want to know, for example, what the actual title is. Now, remember that each of those elements represents this tag up here. to actually get the title, you have to go 3 levels down to this A tag. So you have to go to the first child, and then the first grandchild, and then the first great-grandchild in order to get from here down to here. Okay. So to observe that, let's actually say pick one of the entries, and then say what is the first child of that entry. You see it says P. So basically this says if you pick any entry and then ask what is the first child of that entry, it's the P tag. If I take the P tag and then do the same thing, take the next child of that entry, now I get the A tag. And then if I take the A tag and then take the next one, that's the actual text, which is at that level. So 2 things to note here. The text is itself a child of its parent tag. The other way of accessing that would also be to do it like this. So when you look at HTML and there is text inside a tag, there are 2 ways of accessing that using a DOM parser. One is to say that this text is the child of this, and the other way is to say that this text is the text property of this element. And basically, these are the 2 equivalent ways in which we're getting at that text. Yes, you had a question.
So if there's just text that's left as a child, then it's always the first child. There's no such thing as a second child. It's just text.
You can have both. So in HTML, right? So I can write HTML that looks like. Let's see if I can find it on this page. Yeah, here. So this span tag has 3 children. The first child is this text. The next child is this text. And the third child, the next child is this element. And the third child is this text. And the way it is, if I hover over that, so where is the span tag? I'm going to hover over here. Can you see where it is up there? It's really small now, but this span tag is basically parentheses, then something, and then close parentheses, right? So it's span. The first child is the open parentheses. Then it is this like text in between the 2 parentheses, and then it's the closing. So in order to access this this text, you would have to go look at the individual children, or if I did this, so the span tag is actually, let's figure out how to get to the span tag, right? It is the second child of the first child of the div, right? So that means the second child of the first child is, did I get the count wrong? Hold on. So there's the
First child.
and then the second child should be, why am I not counting correct? So the first child is a P. And then the second child, what's the first child of this? The first child of that is an A. And then the last one, this might have something to do. Why is that text? Oh, okay, so I don't, well, so this might be the way, let me see. So this might be how the HTML is structured, and I'll show you why that's doing that. But if I look for the actual trying to look for the actual code, and then a href, and then that's, oh, okay. So the reason, if I look at the p tag, and then I say how many children does that have, it says 3. But if you look at the inspector, it kind of looks like it should have only 2. Well, but if I look at the code, I realize that in between the A tag and the span tag, there's a little bit of text. That text is a space. So you're not able to see it in here in the inspector, but it is there. Okay. So you can see that trying to guess at the children just by sort of observing what's in the code, it's definitely hard, right? But part of the reason I'm doing that is to like actually show why it is much easier and better to use CSS selectors. But that's basically what is happening, right? So then if I look at the third child, that is span, and then I say how many children does span have? That has 3 children, the first one being the open parentheses, and the third one being the close parentheses. And then the one in between is the A tag that's inside the span tag. Okay, so now we know what the structure is. Okay, well, but that's like we've observed right now, that's really painful. If you have to like keep track of the number of children and keep like adjusting that, and, you know, stare at the code, the HTML source code, it's really painful. So you can actually do this by chaining your CSS selectors. Okay, so I can say instead of searching for, well, what am I searching for? I'm searching for the A tag that is inside of the div tag. The way I do that is I start with the div tag, which I already stored in the variable entry, and do a CSS search again. And that should return a no. Oh, sorry, I keep doing that. That will return another array. This is now of all of the A tags limited to where you're starting from. So I could have started searching from the root, but also I can start searching from any node in between, right? So just to recap, what we did was first we entry equal to, come on, can't type. First I looked at all of the entries. I got all the divs. Then I got the first div. And then within that div, I did another search for the A tag. And then now I know there's only one A tag inside the div, right? So I know for sure that all I have to do is look for the one A tag that I'll get. And if I then ask for the text of that A tag, that'll give me the title. So this way I know for sure that I'm going to get the text because I'm looking inside the specific tag that contains it. Okay. So if I wanted the link that this title goes to, what would I type in here?
So what was the question?
So let me say this. So this is my A tag. Oops. So here's my A tag. I want the hyperlink which is inside this A tag, right? So I want to know what is the link that shows up when I hover over this. How do I get that? Like that, or was that?
That might work if that's.
Yeah, it doesn't. That would have been cool if it did. Yeah, it's an attribute, so you have to actually pass it to the attribute method, and now it tells you what the hyperlink is. Okay, so now it's a lot easier to, so now I can do a little bit of Ruby. I can say all entries dot each, do, here's the entry, and then say, for this, the hyperlink is, and then entry.csa, look for the A, then look for did I get that right? Entry.css, I forgot the 0 again. 0 dot. So basically I just chained everything together in one go. So Ruby block, do an each enumerator. Here I have an array. Essentially it's an array. And then for each entry in the array, I'm printing out what the hyperlink is for that entry. Okay, so now I can start to do similar stuff. I want to say for every story, I want to know when it was submitted. So my first step is let's inspect it. Turns out that it is inside the text that I'm looking for. Let's say I'm looking for how many minutes ago. It is inside an element called time, and it is the text value of time. So I can go back here and say for all entries, tell me it was submitted, and then search for time, and I can look for the text. This is obviously what was on the page when I scraped it. Once you scraped it, you're not making references back to the original web page. We're only making references to the copy of the web page in a DOM object that we have stored. So it's not dynamic. The DOM object is not going to go back and fetch the page again for you and then do the parsing, right? So all of this is from some time ago. Okay, so now I know that I can get each of these pieces. All I have to do is figure out what the corresponding element is, what the corresponding class is, and then try to access that. So that is pretty much the scraping part of any website, right? Any website will have a structure, and you're trying to like decode the structure and come up with the right CSS selectors that will let you access that structure. Okay, so the next piece is actually storing it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some very basic SQL, and we're going to use SQLite, which is a file-based database, a relational database that is very easy to manipulate. You don't need to have your own database server. You just basically are storing your database directly to a file, okay? And when we are creating, trying to manipulate a SQLite database in Ruby, the gem that you need is called SQLite 3. Okay, so that will give you a bunch of methods that make it easy to open a database, send commands to database, and so on. So when you are manipulating a SQL database using SQLite, there's a few different things you have to kind of know when you're manipulating them, and I've already put them in this Ruby file here. By the way, all of this code is available on GitHub, and the link is on the class page, so you can always download and look at the stuff. So basically, this is just a simple task to create a database, and the sort of the two things you need to know is that when you are manipulating a database using SQLite 3, first you have to open a connection to that database. And the way you open that connection is you create a new object in the SQLite database class, which is inside the gem, and you give it the name of a database file. If the file does not exist, it will get created for you. If the file does exist, it will be open for you. Okay, so this way you don't have to have the file; it'll be automatic. And then the other thing you have to know is that every time you want to do something with a database, there's kind of this statement, execute, close sequence. And that happens for every statement. There's always, you create a statement, you execute it, and then you close it. Create a statement, execute it, and close it. So that's just, you can always put this inside a method or put these 3 steps inside a method. For now, let's not worry about this statement. Well, I'll come to that in a minute. But basically, let's look at what's happening here. Obviously, the first thing I want to do is I want to create a table if it does not already exist. So I open my database, and I want to initialize it. And if I'm going to store a database in a SQL database, if I want to store data in a SQL database, then it has to go, all my data has to go into some table. So if the table doesn't exist, we want to create it. Okay. So the structure of the how you create a statement is you say, I want to create this statement and have it be issued to this connection. And here is the statement I want to create. So here what I've done is I've created a table, and each row in the table is going to contain, my goal is that each row will contain all the information for one post. Right? So my first step is going to be to model the table based on what information I want to extract. So I figure I want to extract the title of the post. I want to extract when it was posted, who posted it, and how many comments there are. So that's what I'm interested in storing. So my data model is pretty simple. I'm going to have a title. The title will have, it's a string, right? It's just a sequence of characters. There's going to be a body, and then we can store some text for the body. And then I have the date posted or date written, and I've used a SQLite data type called datetime. Okay, so basically the structure of the create table SQL command is create table. If not exists means do this only if the table doesn't exist. Otherwise, ignore this command. The name of the table, and then in parentheses, the names of the different columns. Okay, so that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm saying create this table. If it doesn't exist, the name of the table is posts, and here are the columns. And each of these column names are then followed by the type of that column. Do you have a question?
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay, so let's actually do that in IRB. So go back to IRB, and I can say SQLite connection equal to SQLite database.new. I'm going to call this test1.db. And I can't remember SQLite 3, not SQLite. And then if I was to close this connection right here and look at the files that have been created, I can see that it just created that for me. Right, so it wasn't there before, but when I said create it created that database as a file. So if I go back to IRB, now if I say create a new database, it will actually open that existing database and give me a connection to that database. Okay, in this database, now I want to create a table. So first, in order to do that, I have to make a statement which says create table, posts, and I'm going to do a slightly different table, so that's why I'm retyping everything. So this time I'm just going to store a string, which is the title of the post, the date posted, I'm going to call it date posted, and like I said, the the data type for a time value is called date time in SQL. And then this time I also want to keep track of how many comments there are. And because number of comments is a number, I'm going to say that the data type for number of comments is an integer. Yeah.
So it looks like you're writing that in Ruby, but on this, when we were looking at the SQL, the SQLite 3, it looked different. There wasn't a colon. So.
Oh, where was it? Oh, then I made the mistake. I don't write a lot of SQL, and so I tend to do that and then make that mistake. Yes. Sorry. So you should also tell it what connection you want to run that statement on, and what. Keep forgetting that in Ruby you cannot have a space before the parentheses when you call a method, which always bugs me that you can't do that. Anyway, so now I have the statement, and then the next thing I have to do is say execute the statement. And just to be safe about it, you close the statement and close the connection. If you forget to close statements and connections, sometimes the file can be left in an incomplete state. So it's usually good to close all your statements and your connection out before you exit your script if you're trying to manipulate a SQL database, a SQLite database. Okay, I will now independently confirm that this in fact did work. I will open my SQLite Manager plugin, and I will say open new database. Oh, not new. I guess I have to say open. Sorry. Connect. Say connect your database. I will then go into my folders where I'm doing all of this work here. And you can see that there is my test database here, which I have to let me. So now when I open it, you can see that I have a table post, and post has a title, it has a date posted, and it has a number of comments. Okay, so all I did was open the same database in my Firefox plugin, but it confirms that I was able to correctly write that statement. If I go back, if I exit out of here and I open it again and I say open my connection, oops. Fire the gem again, open the connection, and then I say, and I'm going to do the same statement. I'm going to try and create that table again, and then if I say statement.execute, it will basically attempt to create it, but because the table already exists, it's not going to try and create a second table with the same name. If I want to insert something into that table, this is the syntax for inserting. So basically it says SQL syntax for inserting, insert into, name of the table, the names of the columns that you're inserting, and then the actual values that you're inserting into those columns. So I can say test post. The date posted is in, I think you can type it into this format, 2014 9/30, and number of comments is 45, and then I can say execute, and then if I refresh it over here, voila, all my data is what I just typed in. The insert also lets you do partial inserts. if I'm not mistaken. I haven't done SQL in a long time, so I'm not 100% sure. But it does let me do a partial insert. So you can see that when I did a partial insert, I said I'm only interested in inserting the title. It inserts the title and then leaves the other as blank or null. In the case of SQL databases, the blank value is typically called a null value. The reason that I'm not super familiar with SQL is because I use Rails or other mapping models that let me do things in the corresponding Ruby code without having to write SQL, right? So the Rails ORM, the object relational model, essentially gives me a list of methods where instead of having to say insert into table name, there's, you just say post.create and it creates that. But really what's happening on the back end is all of this is happening and a bunch of other stuff. But this is essentially the benefit of learning Rails and all of the ORM methods and functions is you don't have to learn SQL, which tends to be a lot harder to remember the syntax for than for ORM, the Rails ORM. Okay. So that is basically what you would do. So now to put it all together, let's see. Let's actually, I guess I have the parser, so I'm kind of tempted to sort of look at it right away. Because we could sort of write all of this from scratch, but I don't really think that that's so interesting because now we know what's happening with each of these statements, right? So I opened the URL, I parsed it. In this case, the URL is a little bit different. I then open a connection to a database. I create my table if it doesn't exist. And then each of these is basically the corresponding CSS selectors that you figure out by looking at the HTML source code. So I know that we've already done this one. We know that if you look for, I did it slightly differently here. I looked for an A tag, which has a class name of title. In the code in IRB, we first look for the div tag, and then we look for the A tag inside the div. But here I directly look for the A tag. For the timestamp, I looked for a class, which I looked for an element whose class name is this. So some of the things that are different, if you have a CSS selector which starts with a dot, is basically the same as if there was a div. It's basically the same as if there's like a wildcard, right? So it's saying any element, right? So it's almost like saying star dot, right? Any element which has a class whose name is live timestamp will be returned. So you can search either on the element name or on the class name. You don't have to do both. So this is basically saying, go look for an element that has a class live timestamp. I don't care what the name of the element is. I just care what the class is. And then I can get the timestamp out of that. For the author, similarly, I said, look for an A tag whose class name is author. And then the name of the author is actually the text of that node. And similarly for all the other stuff. And then the last thing we didn't look at earlier, so what does this bind params do? So basically what I want to do is I want to construct a statement where I want to insert values into the table for each of these columns. But instead of putting the values directly into this string here, I'm going to put a bunch of question marks. And then I'm going to say bind params. And then I'm going to give the individual values that are going to be bound to those question marks. Okay. So it seems like a kind of roundabout way of doing that, right? Like why the Ruby way of doing this, I could have just inserted this directly into my string. I could have gone, hash curly brace and then put it into my string. So why would, any guesses if you don't know SQL? If you know SQL, you probably know the answer. Why would we do this two-step process of binding the value to the parameters as opposed to directly putting it into into the statement. What was that?
Sanitizing.
I didn't catch that.
Sanitizing. So sanitizing.
Oh, sanitizing, right. Did you have an answer? That's the correct answer. What was that? So what does that mean, sanitizing?
Say something like, you heard that volume top tables, like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Bobby Tables problem. If you've ever read XKCD, you'll know what that joke means now, or you know what I mean by that. So basically, if you put the value directly in here, most SQL servers do not parse the incoming statements, okay? So basically, if my statement looks like insert into a table 1, and I say title, values, and if I say something like this is I think if you do that, delete. So notice that if my variable, so let's say I had a variable. It was like, here's the value of the variable. I want to substitute the value of the variable x into this, right? So I would have said something like that. Now, if the value of x is actually, if x was equal to something like, maybe I should just do this. Maybe I should just do this inside the IRB. Let's actually do it. Let's actually do the thing, which is the unsecure way of doing this. So let me require, open my connection, and here's the thing I want to say. X equal to title 1, delete from posts. Okay, so that's my value of the variable x, right? And then I'm going to say, create a new statement, insert into post, and here's the title. And then I just want that title to be right. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to insert into post title, and the title will be an X. And if I do that, oops, that's not what I meant. If I do that, did I get that right? Is that going to break? Is that going to actually do the thing it's supposed to do? I think. Statement.execute. And I don't know if it did that. Oh, is it smart enough to figure that out? It might have. Or should I put that? Oh, maybe I should put that. It keeps giving me a remainder. What was that? Is it delete stop? Huh? Is it? It is just delete from post, right? It should be. Delete from post. And then so this goes values. Middle 1. Close, colon, delete from post. I've actually never tried to do this on purpose. So I wasn't aware that maybe it does not actually work the way that I would expect it to work. So it does say, it does get a remainder. It's like not executing that remainder part. Let me just check that I'm getting this right. So if I just say delete from posts, and then I look at what happened. Yeah, so delete from post does work. Well, I didn't expect that it actually does some kind of auto sanitizing in SQLite. I would have to look that up. I was not aware of that. Was that? Yeah, there would be some like obvious things it'll sanitize, but that I don't know how it would have figured that out. It just it looks correct to me. Oh no, wait. I think I left too many. Still getting that. Oh no, I see what I still have this leftover parentheses, so I need to deal with that parentheses, and I don't know enough. I don't know enough SQL to figure out the best way to. You see what I'm saying? Like, there was this last bit of this parentheses, and I need to find a way to hack around that parentheses. Because in the statement, if the statement is, like the statement is, let's say it assumes you're going to open and close the parentheses, then I need to hack the fact that the statement has this closing parentheses, and I don't quite know how to hack that. Yeah, I'm not able to figure that out. Well, unfortunately, I'm not able to show an example of where you're actually able to hack the database because I never tried to do it. I swear. Was that? So yeah, this I'll have to figure out how to like actually craft a SQL query that gets past whatever it is that SQLite is doing, but I'm not able to figure that out right now. But yeah, basically so just go back to the code, the bind params is a way of doing the sanitization. So make sure that when these values are inserted in here, any special characters in them which would be interpreted differently would be escaped essentially, and will not interfere with the actual SQL statement that you're creating. Okay. Well, honestly, I didn't have more than that. That was pretty much all I had prepared for. Like I said, I didn't expect. I thought like this might involve a lot of explanation of SQL and like DOM and HTML. But if folks are like, "Oh, that was pretty easy," we could.
It almost like we populated the database very much, though.
Well, we didn't, so we can do that because I didn't actually run the command, the script, right? So if I look at what the script is doing, I already have a database here, so let me actually remove that and let's actually run this script one time. So my script did a bunch of stuff. It went and got the page, it parsed it out, it showed me a log of everything that happened, and noticed that the database is now back here again. And it actually has the values in the database. And to look at what the values are, if I go back to my SQL manager, that, connect to a database. Here's my database, files, testdb. now I can look at this and I can see that all of the values that I just scraped is in my database. And I have the timestamp value and so on. And the number of comments in the category. I guess I did not get the category, or maybe I'm not parsing it correctly. So that's one thing we could do. We can actually look at the code and figure out why the category is not getting populated. So if it had been, inserted, the value of cat name, so I'm attempting to insert a category. So let's debug that. So I don't know why it didn't do that. I'm attempting to insert that by doing this CSS selector. So my guess is that the category is name is inside the text value of the A element whose class name is subreddit. Okay, that was my guess. I don't know what happened. Why did that guess not work? If I go back in here and I look at a specific category, which I think was, I was trying to get it from here. So supposedly I should have gotten that category from here. So here's the A element. One of its class names is subreddit. So that should have extracted the category node, and then the name would have been that in the text. But for some reason, the category name is blank. So that's why I have this debugging message here, and for some reason that's blank. Why would that be blank? Well, maybe it's not the same on the other subreddit. That would be weird. So let's look at what I was scraping. I thought I was scraping this. Because when I scrape, okay. So here's actually a bug that I wasn't aware of. I looked for the class name on the Reddit new page, where the Reddit new page does say posted to and gives you the subreddit. But then in my code, I was parsing a subreddit itself. And when I did that, I didn't notice that the structure of the subreddit page does not say which subreddit it was posted to. Makes sense, right? Because it's already on a subreddit. So obviously what I did was I wrote the code based on this structure, and then I blindly assumed that it would work exactly the same. So the same structure would have been used on this page, right? So like visually, if you look at it, like I just did a cursory, like, oh yeah, it looks the same. I forgot that the subreddit is not there. And actually the subreddit is inside this element, not inside the other element. So if I wanted to work on this page, I would say, oh, what is this element? It is actually, so I'm actually going to have to look for an A, or look for a span whose class is domain, and then look for the second child of that, and then extract it from there, and then I would get Rails. So if I did that, it would be something like, look for a span whose class name is domain, and then take the and then on that, so I think you can chain. You can change the CSS selector this way. I haven't tried this, but I'm pretty sure you can. So basically, I'm saying get a list of all the elements, which are the span and then the domain. And then on that list, do another search. This time, look for the A tag. Now, if I say that, so that should give me the category name. not 100% sure of that. Let me check it in IRB first. So if I say that, require here's my DOM. Let me turn off the echoing, and then I say post equal to all entries make sure that I got that right. Okay, so I got all entries, and then if I look at that and I say give me span for a given entry, look for the span domain, and then within that look for this, and then look for the text of that. I get that. So basically you can chain the selectors this way, right? So what this is saying is within the post, first look for this selector, and then within the list of all elements that you get back from this search, do another search.
So you couldn't do span.domain.a?
You can also do another selector, which is this. This is essentially a different syntax in CSS selectors. And this syntax says, look for all elements that are A, but which have a parent or any ancestor, which is span followed by a domain. So that's what the search in CSS means. It means look for a span element whose class is domain, and then look for a descendant of that span element, which is A. So this is actually the fastest way to get to that specific node, which is like search for span and then look for the descendant that is the A element. So if I do that over here, let's actually do the smartest, fastest way, and then say cat name is this. So I need that. So cat name is that. Now if I run my script and I check in my log file, it says, oh good, now I have the category name in my log file that confirms it. And let's double confirm it by refreshing my table. And you'll see that there's 25 entries that I put in earlier with the mistaken code. And then now there are 25 more entries, but now the code is working. And so now I have the category names as well. Cool. So we actually ran the code and populated the database. And we're able to see it actually open the database and sort of insert more entries into the database. You know, we have time, so we might as well do the last step, which I did not, in fact, write the code for. So I'm going to like live code it, and I'll probably make a bunch of mistakes, but we'll figure it out. Which is every time I scrape the page, well, what's going to happen right now is the code only scrapes the page and then inserts a record for every entry it finds on the page. But it doesn't check if that entry is already there. Right, so you're going to get duplicate entries in the page. So I think I can sort. So if I sort, I'm using the GUI now, but I'm sorting, and you can notice that looks like there's duplicate entries in here. That's because on this page there are not these posts are not being made too often. If you do this on the main Reddit new page, like you'll never see a duplicate entry because there are more than 25 entries a minute. Okay, so every time you scrape it. I would say more than 25 entries a second. So every time you scrape it, you're going to get 25 new entries. So, so if you do it on here, though, there's an entry roughly every like few hours. So if I keep scraping it, my database is going to keep getting the same values. Okay, so the way I would do that is obviously before I do an insert into the post, I want to do a select from the table and check if the post is already there. Okay. So I'm going to say if well, I'm just going to code it here. So found the post is false, and then I'll say if not found post, then we will do this. So how do we know if we found the post or not? Well, we will first do a statement, which is SQLite3 statement dot new for my connection, select from posts where title equal to question mark, and we'll say statement dot find params. What do we bind it to? The title node.text. And then the way you do that is you say execute the statement, and if you're executing a statement for which you expect to get return values, those will be returned inside a variable. And this is the thing that I've forgotten. If rows actually behaves like a list, so let me check that on the SQLite3. Let's see, there's a tutorial that lets you do, it says, yeah, so when you do a select, it just gives you a list of rows, and you can then say statement.execute do for each row if row dot if row dot is a dot or a title, I'm not quite sure, equal to wait, so I think just say rows equal to that, and then if post equal to I'm not 100% sure if that works, so I'm going to check it in IRB. Go to that. Let's see. Might open the database. How do we do that? Again, beginning. Fire SQLite3. Open my database. Okay. Statement is equal statement new select from posts from the post rows equal to statement.execute and then rows stopped. Great. So that's basically what it does. So if I have a statement that says select from posts where title, let's see, where number of comments equal to 10, let's say, where number of comments equal to 10. Then I say execute that statement, then that has only one row. And then to access each row, I guess you can't access it that way. Rows.each. I don't know if there's a way to go to iterate through each of the rows without, after you've done the execute. SQLite 3. No, there's a neat little tutorial somewhere. Ruby SQLite 3. I guess you have to actually iterate through each of those rows individually. It's interesting. Next. So you cannot actually iterate through it more than once. Don't quite know why. That would be the structure. But if I did that, so each row might, let's see, give me, I don't know if it'll do that automatically. As hash. No. I guess to get the individual columns, I don't.
Use Pluck.
Pluck is a Rails or is an active record. Is an active record method. I don't know what the method is for. Oh, do you have to do that first? I think you have to do that first on your connection. Let me try that. I do that, and then I say, did that actually print the different? Still not giving me the set. So it can give me the count, but then it won't give me the individual rows.each. Row equal to rows.next. Row.class. Okay, now I'm getting somewhere. Okay, so that was a little bit more complicated than I thought SQLite lets you do. So there's two things you have to do. One is that you have to tell your database here that you want the results as a hash. When you tell the database that first, then you construct your statement, and when you execute the statement, you get a bunch of rows, and then you get only one go at iterating through the rows, which is similar to what happens when you open a file, right? When you open a file and you have a file handle, you can only read the file handle once. Once you've read through the file handle, you reach the end of file, you can't read that read from it again. You cannot go back one line. So it's similar to that. You get all these rows, and you can only go through them once. But in this case, all we're looking for in our code up here is just saying select star from posts, and then you found the post if the number of rows is greater than 0. Right? So if there's at least one post whose title is the same as the one I'm trying to insert, then I know that I found the post, so I'm not going to insert that. So only if I don't already have that post, I'm going to try and get it again. So now if I go back to my database, I'm going to delete everything first. I'm going to go back into my database, and I can see that there is nothing in there. I'm now going to run my command. Oops, I forgot to close that statement, and I forgot to say dot. Right, that was the thing I need to do. So let me go back here, delete everything once again. Okay, so now I see the first time I ran it, I have 25 rows, right? And now because I'm checking every time, hopefully I did this right, and it still has 25 rows. So I'm refreshing here, but it's not going to add that row again. Because what I did in the code was to say, if I'm able to find a row which has that title, I'm not going to reinsert. Cool, so I learned a little bit more about how SQLite 3 and iterating through the rows works. Obviously, if I can confirm that here, say something like else, and something like already have a row with that title. So now if I ran that, it scrapes and gets a bunch of things. For every one of them, it says already have a row with that title. And if we do this like an hour from now, there'll be a new post, and you can scrape it, and that post will be added to your database. So you essentially have a script now that you can imagine running this in the background, and it runs every hour, and then it looks at the page, and every new post that's on the page, it will download that and put it in your database. So you kind of have the skeleton of a web scraper that you can build. Cool. I'm kind of done. Any questions? Or Ruby, parsing, DOMs, SQL? Okay.
Oh, do you know if there's this plugin for
Chrome?
Does Chrome do anything like that?
Must be. Chrome SQLite browser plugin. Yep.
Oh, cool.
Probably